Will this endless rain herald the dawn of a new, water-soaked epoch, forever altering the course of our lives? After 20 days of relentless heat, a torrential downpour lasted for a day and a night. Everyone was over the moon, but little did they know, this rain would go on for an entire year. Crowds at the supermarket entrance were all grins and giggles, splashing in the rain, reveling in the rare respite from the sweltering heat. I stepped out with a bag of pork, watching the rain pour harder and harder from the supermarket's awning. I'm not averse to rain, after all, I was practically roasted alive by the heat wave. But there's a catch, I've got a phobia of rainwater. It all goes back to 3 years ago when I drove into a lake on a rainy night and nearly drowned. If it weren't for the car window shattering, I wouldn't be here today. Ever since, water's been my kryptonite, and even the sight of rain sends shivers down my spine. I checked the weather forecast on my phone. Temperatures were set to drop, with the scorching 111.5 degrees Fahrenheit heatwave replaced by a much cozier 91.4 degrees Fahrenheit. But the catch? A week of non-stop rain was on the horizon. Sometimes it rained in the morning, sometimes at night. With a sigh, I decided to stock up at the supermarket. I hadn't hoarded much during the heatwave, but with this incessant rain, I wasn't keen on braving the outdoors. I loaded up on 10 packs of steak, 12 pounds of frozen chicken wings, 3 bags of dumplings, and 4 bags of glutinous rice balls, my go-to comfort foods. Plus, I grabbed a big bag of tomatoes and sweet potatoes, a box of mixed congee, and a case of instant noodles. This haul should last me a week, easy. If I rationed it out, it could even stretch to a month. With my supplies in tow, I hailed a cab back to my place, a 950 square foot apartment on the 3rd floor of a mid-range complex. As I lugged my groceries inside, the rain seemed to intensify, pounding against the windows as if they'd shatter any moment. Outside was a monochrome blur, the rain celebrants had all retreated home. I drew the curtains and dialed my folks. Back home in the mountains, they were feeling the impact of the downpour too. Dad warned me to stay safe, saying he'd never seen rain like this in years. "Son, be careful. This rain is something else," he advised. I reassured him I'd be fine and told him not to venture out either. He agreed and reminded me to head for higher ground if water levels rose. After the call, I took a hot shower and hit the hay, only to be haunted by nightmares of being submerged in water. I woke to silence, no rain pounding against the window. Had it stopped? I rushed to open the curtains, and the view outside was a water world. The first floor was flooded, and complaints echoed through the complex. I stayed cooped up, too spooked to face the water. But as I scoured the internet, I realized this rain wasn't just a local thing. It was a global phenomenon, with places that rarely saw rain now drenched. This wasn't just a downpour, it was a harbinger of something bigger, a reminder that we're all in this together, facing an uncertain future. We need to brace ourselves, prepare for the unknown, and stand united against whatever comes our way. Initially, the catastrophe went unnoticed. It started with a week of unrelenting rain, and soon, extensive flooding was reported across the globe. The capital of Elephant Nation was hit with a once-in-a-century downpour, submerging vast shantytowns. In the United States, the subway system experienced its deadliest flooding disaster in 30 years. Even the Antarctic research stations found themselves under a 3-day hailstorm. The news carried a heavy, apocalyptic tone. I frowned, peering into the blank sky outside. All I could see was a sheet of white, nothing else. Had the rain finally stopped, or was it just taking a breather? By evening, a semblance of order returned to our community. The supermarket within the complex reopened, but the absence of rain did little to lift the oppressive mood. My fear of water made me think twice, and my mind drifted to that rain that lasted for 2 million years. For a moment, I paused, then I slipped on my rain boots and hurried to the supermarket. Although the store was packed, most of the shoppers were children, a sign that not everyone was taking the situation seriously. They still wanted to buy groceries, believing the rain had stopped. I quickly began my real shopping spree. I stocked up on hundreds of bags of chicken wings and drumsticks, 50 packs of ham sausages, 30 boxes of biscuits, 20 bags of bread, and 2 crates of bottled water. I also bought flashlights, batteries, power banks, and other essentials to prepare for a potential power outage. The supermarket staff stared in disbelief as I loaded up, but I ignored them and made trip after trip, moving all my supplies back to my apartment. It would last me 2 or 3 months, if I rationed it carefully. I also had a large bag of rice at home, which would last even longer without a power outage. Next, I visited the pharmacy and stocked up on various medications like Imodium and Pepto-Bismol for diarrhea and other common ailments. But despite all these preparations, I still didn't feel secure. My biggest fear was the water level rising to my 3rd-floor apartment. I then reached out to a person in our owners group who had bought a place in our building but lived elsewhere, only returning every 2 or 3 years. His apartment, 3102 on the 31st floor, was often rented out, and he frequently posted rental notices in the group. I told him I had a tenant for him and offered my services as a middleman for a small fee. He gladly agreed, and we settled on a rent of $3,500 per month for 3 months. The property management even sent someone to hand over the keys to me. I then began moving my supplies to the 31st floor, running up and down the stairs. A few neighbors asked what I was doing, and when I told them I was moving supplies to exchange with neighbors for money, they stopped questioning me. By 9 p.m., I had finished moving everything. Exhausted but determined, I checked the doors and windows one last time. Now, holed up on the 31st floor with a room full of supplies, I finally breathed a sigh of relief. The sound of raindrops hitting the windows was relentless, like the devil's tentacles reaching out to the earth. The rain had returned, even more intense than before. Despite my meticulous preparations, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. The entire community was in chaos. Owners who had just moments before been outside rushed back home. The property management issued a notice immediately, urging everyone to stay indoors and secure their doors and windows. The owners group was a flurry of complaints and concerns. Didn't the meteorological service say it wouldn't rain anymore? They asked. I just managed to grab some meat and was rushing home, and now this? Our garage is still flooded, and now it's pouring again. If this keeps up, even the 1st floor will be submerged. As I expected, by 2 a.m., amidst the noisy downpour, there were faint cries and curses, audible even from the 31st floor. The 1st floor was definitely flooded, and the commotion in the corridors indicated that the 1st floor residents were fleeing to higher levels. The higher floor owners were proactive in helping, some saving furniture, others offering shelter to those from lower floors. The spirit of mutual aid was palpable in the group, but I was preoccupied with the news from across the country. Twitter was ablaze with news of the nationwide rainstorms. Most cities were experiencing non-stop rain, like our Yucheng, which had started and stopped repeatedly. The top trending topic was an expert's prediction that the nationwide deluge could lead to a once-in-a-century flood in the middle and lower reaches of the Yangtze River. The situation in the economic hubs of the North, New York, and Los Angeles was also dire. For instance, LaGuardia Airport in New York was completely submerged, and the Hudson River was flooded. Large areas in New Jersey, the Bronx, and other places were paralyzed, and even the capital was not spared. The drainage systems had failed, and half the city was submerged in rainwater. These reports chilled me to the bone. Initially, Yucheng was the focus of the trending topics, but now it was just one of many cities in crisis. The torrential rain was too fierce for anyone to handle. My sense of crisis was not just due to my water phobia but also the catastrophic news from all over the country. I couldn't help but think of that rain that lasted for 2 million years. The current downpour defied logic, and it might signal a mass extinction event. I hurriedly searched the internet for information, focusing on two questions: what if the rain continued for a month, 3 months, or even a year, and how could I save myself? After hours of searching, I found no detailed answers on self-rescue. It seemed the only option was to stay high and dry. If the rain continued, the consequences would be dire. In about half a month, power outages and internet disruptions would occur due to damaged infrastructure, and many people would fall ill due to the damp conditions. In about a month, low-lying areas would be submerged, and massive floods and landslides would break out. 2 months later, small-scale famines would begin, with people dying of starvation. By 4 months, infectious diseases would spread, and by 6 months, many animals and plants would die, and low-altitude areas would be submerged. By the end of a year, except for high-altitude regions and mountains, there might be no land left on Earth. The horror was overwhelming, and I couldn't stop myself from imagining what would happen if the rain continued for months or a year, and what about my parents? I quickly called my parents. Fortunately, there was still a signal. As soon as my dad answered, he said, "Son, the weather is abnormal. I think we should head to the mountains. Wunyang Mountain is over 2,000 meters high, and there are caves for shelter." The village was flooded the day before yesterday, and landslides killed many people. My dad's voice choked with tears, and I was frantic. "Why didn't you tell me earlier? I was worried about you. It seems things are tough there too. I saw on the news that many communities in your area are flooded." I reassured him that I was on the 31st floor and suggested they gather the villagers, take food and drink, and head to Wunyang Mountain for shelter. My dad agreed and suggested I find a chance to join them. Wunyang Mountain, being the highest peak in Yucheng, would never flood. His words sparked a realization. If I could hide in the caves on Wunyang Mountain, the 2,000-meter elevation would be safe from the floods. Plus, Wunyang Mountain is a scenic area with steps leading up and buildings on the mountaintop and waste, making it an ideal refuge. But for now, I couldn't leave. Everywhere was flooded, and without a boat, it was impossible to escape. Moreover, my 31st floor apartment was over 100 meters high. It would be difficult for the water to reach that level unless the rain continued for months. I reassured my dad that I was safe for now and promised to head to Wunyang Mountain if the opportunity arose. After hanging up, I was mentally exhausted from the overwhelming anxiety and fear. I cooked some food to fill my stomach, took a hot shower, and crawled into bed, knowing it would be a sleepless night. The next morning, I was jolted awake by a nightmare, and the sound of the furious rain was the first thing I heard. The rain roared like heaven's wrath, accompanied by howling winds that slammed against the windows. The building was relatively quiet now, with everyone exhausted from the previous night's chaos. Those from the lower floors had sought refuge in the homes of those on higher floors. I patted my face, stepped into the living room, and found it covered in a layer of rainwater. Water was leaking from a corner of the ceiling, and the gaps in the windows allowed rain to seep in. This was the downside of living on the top floor. These kinds of torrential rains made it almost impossible for the penthouse not to leak. Thankfully, the building had good drainage, and the rainwater wouldn't accumulate too much. Still, it was frustrating to see. I moved all my food into the bedroom to protect it from the rain, but there was nothing I could do about the living room. The group chat was in disarray, with people desperate for food and lamenting the destruction of their homes. Despite the chaos and sorrow, neighbors continued to help each other and wait for rescue. But I couldn't help but think that when food became scarce, houses were damp, and the sick were everywhere, the entire building could turn into a living hell. After 20 days of scorching heat, torrential rains had been pouring down for over half a month. All the residents in the community were helping each other out, but I could only hide in an unoccupied room on the top floor, listening to the wails of despair outside. I admit that what I was doing was selfish and immoral, but I was truly afraid. I feared the dark side of human nature erupting. So, I stepped out of the living room again, treading through the rainwater to make sure the doors were locked. Then, I pushed the shoe cabinet and partition against the door, wedging it shut. I needed to ensure absolute safety. With the heavy iron gate separating me from the outside world, I wasn't afraid even of the potential loss of life. If someone came knocking, I planned to play dead. After all, this apartment had been unoccupied for days, and even after the power went out, no one came to the door. Although many people had come to the 31st floor, they all sought refuge in other people's homes. The downpour grew more intense, beyond the description of any red alert. The property management office was silent, likely submerged as well. After having lunch, I heard desperate cries from outside. The second and third floors were completely flooded. It was terrifying. I looked down and saw that the fourth floor was about to be submerged too. Judging by the water level, the city's government buildings must have been flooded as well. The cries for help were desperate, the atmosphere of despair spreading faster than the rain itself. Another 3 days passed, and the rain, now accompanied by a storm, had been falling for half a month. Except for the day I stocked up on supplies, it had been raining non-stop. I hid in my bedroom, too afraid to leave. The living room was filled with water, and the drainage system was failing. Soon, my bedroom would be soaked as well. I charged my phone with a power bank, using my data to browse the latest news online. With the entire country experiencing rainfall, the information available online was mostly provided by netizens in various locations. In the face of this unprecedented disaster, the cries for help were echoing from every corner of the globe. Messages of desperation filled the air. The entire basin around Chengdu is crying out for help. We're on the brink of a complete inundation. Yangqing is pleading for assistance. The Pearl River's banks have given way, and even from across the ocean, a voice from the U.S. I'm stranded here as hurricanes and tsunamis ravage the west coast. Is there any hope for rescue through the embassy? As I read these harrowing messages, my throat constricted and my hands shook with fear and anxiety. The reality was sinking in. This was not just a series of natural disasters, but a potential mass extinction event. The relentless rain that had poured down for weeks had thrown the world into a state of pandemonium, and the situation was only worsening. The thought was terrifying. What if the rain didn't let up? The death toll, already staggering in the hundreds of thousands, would continue to climb. And in the aftermath, as food supplies dwindled and the rot of the dead spread, the specter of infectious diseases loomed large. In a desperate attempt to stay informed, I tried to refresh the information page on my device, but to no avail. My heart plummeted as I realized the internet had gone dark. With the power already out, I was left feeling a deep sense of isolation. We were all islands unto ourselves, adrift in a world gone mad, each one of us fighting for survival on our own. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on my mind. It was clear that the world as we knew it was on the brink of collapse, and survival now hinged on our ability to endure the unimaginable and band together in the face of overwhelming adversity. A cry came from outside, "The flood is coming. Run!" Others saw it too and screamed in terror. They were in the corridor on the 31st floor, and from their vantage point, they must have seen the north side, where the terrain was higher with mountains and rivers. I immediately realized that a mountain torrent from the north had triggered a tsunami on land. Our once towering buildings were about to be hit by the terrifying force of the floodwater. I couldn't see the flood from inside my room, but I could hear the rumbling waves, the thunderous crashes accompanied by the cracking of buildings along the way. It was like an ancient beast charging, sending shivers down my spine. It was too late to wonder if our building would hold. Even if it did, the damage would likely be severe. The destructive power of the flood was no less than that of an earthquake. I retreated to my bedroom, closing the door tightly, and crawled under the bed. I only knew how to hide from earthquakes, not floods, so my instinct was to hide under the bed, hoping it would provide some protection. If the walls were shattered by the flood, the bed might cushion the impact. I couldn't think of anything else to do but pray that the building would withstand the onslaught. The howling outside grew louder. There were frantic footsteps and shouts, "Go up! The flood is too high. Go to the top floors. Hiding inside is useless." Some smart people were rushing upstairs, which indirectly confirmed that the flood was indeed too high. The flood from the north was likely no less than a catastrophic tsunami, set to engulf everything in its path and turn the entire Yucheng district into a vast ocean. Those who remained on the lower floors were essentially signing their own death warrants. Clutching the bed legs, my body drenched in cold sweat, my teeth chattering, I could barely hold back my fear. The traumatic memories from 3 years ago came flooding back: a cold, rainy night, the icy lake water, the shattered glass. I even started hallucinating, my mind a blank as a loud crash echoed. It felt like a giant hammer hit my back, and my body slid forward, my head slamming into the wall. In my dizziness, I heard countless impacts, the building becoming a rock by the sea, battered by wave after wave. The yellow, muddy water was filled with scattered debris, floating corpses. The flood had arrived, and many in the corridor were swept away by the force of the water, their fate unknown. They were too slow, perhaps because they had come up from the lower floors and didn't have time to hide in other people's homes. As the building shook violently, I heard the creaking of walls and the sound of plaster falling. Cracks appeared everywhere, and the ceiling in the living room seemed to burst. I clung to the corner of the wall, smelling the foul stench as the floodwater, filled with the stench of decay, flooded my home. I thought I was done for. The flood had reached the 31st floor, and I was sure to be submerged. But fortune wasn't entirely cruel to me. Although water waves kept crashing in, the towering waves did not sweep through. That meant the flood couldn't submerge the 31st floor. It might have swallowed the 20th floor and its tail lashed the 31st. I let out a sigh of relief, but my relief was short-lived as a loud crash shook the building, and I felt myself slide to the right. The building was tilting to the right, undoubtedly due to the flood damaging something on the right side of the building or creating a large hole. Whatever the case, the building's tilt was enough to indicate that it was unsafe. Hiding on the 31st floor, I knew that the building would eventually collapse due to the flood. The screams continued unabated. I heard a neighbor's wife shouting for help, her cries echoing in the halls. The building was about to collapse, and I, who was already terrified of water, now faced the possibility of the building collapsing as well. My courage was shattered, and I could only curl up under the bed, playing the ostrich. But when the ceiling started to crackle like steel and concrete breaking, I knew I had to leave. If the entire ceiling collapsed, I would be trapped here, possibly dying on the spot. I bit my wrist in desperation and crawled out, grabbing 2 large suitcases as I fled. I had reached the kitchen door, sitting against the wall, soaked through and through. My vision was blurry, and the stench was overpowering. I held on to the 2 suitcases, which were my only salvageable belongings. One contained basic food and water, the other, some medication. I didn't bring them out intentionally, I simply couldn't carry anything else. Suddenly, a loud explosion somewhere pierced through the sound of the flood. More ceiling collapsed, and furniture broke apart. What could I do? There was no way to save them. I crawled to a different spot each time debris fell, moving 3 times before half of the living room's ceiling was completely gone. Above was a blank sky and the relentless rain, like the mouth of a demon. I couldn't bear to look at it, struggling to breathe. I turned my head away and saw the world outside the balcony, a horrifying sight. The yellow flood roared and raged, carrying trees, buildings, and the dead, all streaming southward. This was an apocalypse more devastating than the scenario depicted in The Wandering Earth. The flood that had submerged the Earth 100,000 years ago was now repeating itself. Humanity never learns to heighten its vigilance. At first, no one paid attention to the downpour, assuming it would pass quickly. But as the rain continued for a month, the horrifying reality of the end times dawned on everyone. The relentless rainfall triggered mountain floods and tsunamis that surged forth, carrying with them trees, buildings, and the dead. The yellow floodwaters rushed southward, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. I watched as the building across from me collapsed, a victim of the flood's unforgiving force. Our own building was likely submerged up to the 20th floor or more. For the first time, I saw the flood with my own eyes, the ravenous, reddish-yellow beast that was harvesting everything in Yucheng. I couldn't fathom how many lives it had claimed. This scene of utter despair shattered my mental defenses. The nightmare of 3 years ago was now infinitely magnified. I could breathe, yet felt suffocated. Death crossed my mind. How insignificant we are in the face of nature's wrath. I was sure I wouldn't survive, unable to conquer the trauma of 3 years past or escape this tilted, flooding sea. But then, a glimmer of hope. I wished my parents could survive. They had ascended Wunyang Mountain, a place that couldn't be reached by the floodwaters. This thought brought me a small measure of comfort, and I took a deep breath, mustering the courage to look up at the sky outside. "Damn it, are you trying to kill me?" I muttered to the heavens. Suddenly, something felt off. The sky seemed to be missing something. The torrential rain that had been my greatest fear was gone. The downpour had actually stopped, leaving me in disbelief. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, confirming that the rain was indeed over. It had stopped. Ecstatic shouts echoed from the neighboring apartments, spreading throughout the building. On every floor, survivors were cheering that the rain had ceased. I, who had been convinced of my impending death, now found hope as the building, though tilted, had stabilized. The most intense barrage of the flood had passed, and the structure had withstood it. Doubling our joy, I leaned against the wall and made my way to the balcony. Looking outside, I saw that the rain had truly stopped. The floodwaters rushing past the lower 20 floors now seemed more docile. We were alive, and that was enough for now. Neighbors encouraged each other from their balconies. Since the 31st floor was the highest, it had become a refuge for many from the lower floors. Our floor was bustling with activity, and I realized how many people were still around. For a moment, I was infected by their spirit, feeling an indescribable sense of emotion. Humans are indeed social animals. Listening to their stories of survival, I felt a warmth inside, and my desire to live flared up again. I had to get to Wunyang Mountain. It wasn't safe here. The temporary cessation of the rain was just a respite, a chance to catch our breath. As long as the sky remained ominously white, the rain hadn't truly stopped. I needed to leave this place. Wunyang Mountain was my destination. I had been thinking about it but couldn't make the journey. Now, with the floodwaters rampant, it seemed even more impossible. But the pause in the rain might allow the waters to recede somewhat. If I could find a boat, I could travel southeast towards Wunyang Mountain. As long as I reached it before the rain started again, I could survive. With my resolve strengthened like never before, I understood that hiding alone would lead to death. I needed to rely on the collective strength of the group that I leaped towards the southeast, where the hazy flood had swallowed everything. But there, amidst the devastation, were my parents and the towering mountains over 2,000 meters high. "Who has any fever medicine?" I heard a cry from outside. A child had been running a high fever for 2 days, and now their condition was worsening. Desperate knocks on doors echoed as people sought medicine. The 31st floor became chaotic as many rushed out to help. "I'm a doctor, and I have medicine at home," someone declared, "but my home on the 15th floor is already flooded." "Hey, I've swallowed a lot of floodwater, and my stomach hurts badly." "Does anyone have painkillers?" another voice called out. Despite the dire situation, people gathered together, still thinking of helping each other. But our resources were limited. Many came up from the floors below, asking for food and medicine. The building was filled with the stench of decay, and I had an ominous feeling. This was the harbinger of infectious diseases. The floodwaters carried too many bacteria, and with so many dead in the building, who knew how many bodies lay unattended in the submerged rooms below the 20th floor? I listened to the sounds of the crowd, realizing how insignificant one person's power was in the face of such a disaster. If the rain came again, all the dark sides of human nature would be exposed. We all had to die, and we needed to unite and save ourselves. I opened my door with medicine in hand, and the crowd turned to look at me, surprised to see someone emerge from a room that had been silent until now. Without a word, I opened the leather suitcase filled with various medicines. The supplies were well preserved and still usable. A woman holding a child in her arms, her hands shaking, thanked me profusely. A tall man with a kind smile introduced himself as Dr. Liang Yu from the People's Hospital. In these dire times, self-interest and nobility were just different shades of the same desire to live. We had to survive. I spoke up, "We need to leave here. The rain will come again, and we can't take that chance." The crowd's expressions changed. Many had likely come to the same realization but were hesitant to voice it. Liang Yu agreed, "We can't stay. Even if we could hide in the building, we'd eventually starve without food. It's better to take a risk." The consensus among the group solidified, and a pair of twins who were water sports athletes volunteered to navigate if we found a boat. This renewed our hope. The only remaining issue was finding a boat. An elderly man with glasses suggested we look to the north side of the building, where a boatyard was located. The floodwaters might have carried some boats downstream. We peered out of the broken windows and spotted a boat lodged on the 21st floor. It was a battered fishing boat, no more than 10 meters long, but it hadn't sunk, indicating that its main structure was still sound. Though one boat might not be enough, we decided to investigate further to see if more had been carried down by the flood. Liang Yu took charge, rallying a group of able-bodied men to go downstairs and secure the boat. I stayed on the 31st floor, keeping an eye on the sky, which remained ominously white. I remembered that the last pause in the rain had lasted a day. How long would this respite last? After 20 days of scorching heat, the heavy rain finally took a breather after more than a month of downpour. The flood had submerged all the buildings below the 20th floor, leaving us, the survivors, huddled together on the highest floor of the 31st. We prepared to seek a boat the next day to journey to Wunyang Mountain, 20 kilometers away. As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply. The fire cast a dim light, and some elderly people huddled in the corners, nearly delirious from the cold. I clutched my leather suitcase and made my way to the 21st floor, where the darkness was punctuated by faint shadows. Liang Yu and his team had managed to secure a fishing boat outside the balcony of Unit 2105 with ropes. The boat's engine was long gone, but thankfully it wasn't a small wooden vessel that would have disintegrated by now. I brought them food, and after eating half a pack of dried meat, Liang Yu's spirits seemed to lift. I spoke up, "We must leave at dawn. I fear the rain will start again." The figures in the darkness immediately became serious. Liang Yu agreed that an early departure was feasible, but a single boat couldn't carry many people. We hadn't been able to find a second boat, and there were over 30 survivors just on the 31st floor, not to mention the rest of the building. More than 30 people would definitely be willing to go to Wunyang Mountain, and a fishing boat without power would face a treacherous journey through the floodwaters, even more so in the rocky terrain. As I frowned in thought, Liang Yu proposed a solution. We'll send out one group tomorrow morning. Lin Dong, you take the women, children, and the elderly, with Abu at the helm. About 15 people should be manageable. Abu, one of the twins, was a water sports athlete and would be capable of steering us through the treacherous waters. Old Mao, a worker from the boatyard, spoke up. Today we saw at least 5 boats being swept downstream, but they were too far away to reach. If another boat comes our way, we can send out another group. The boats should get larger as time goes on, since the smaller ones would have already been overturned. They had already made their plans. I would leave with their families first, with only Abu, a young and strong man, to help me steer. I didn't have any objections but urged Liang Yu to be careful. The night began, and I couldn't shake the unease in my heart. I kept looking at the sky, fearing the sudden return of the rain. Fortunately, when dawn broke, the rain held off, and a sliver of light appeared in the east, piercing the monotonous gray. The sun. Everyone cheered and jumped for joy. Although the sun wasn't clearly visible, that was indeed sunlight. The rain had truly stopped, and the sun had come out. Liang Yu turned to me, Lin Dong, it doesn't look like it's going to rain anymore. I shook my head, I don't know, but I feel it will. The sunlight can't penetrate the cloud layer, the sky is as if wrapped in a membrane. This is too unusual. It's great to see a ray of light, but we can't let our guard down. Seeing a glimmer of sunlight was a cause for celebration, but we couldn't afford to be complacent. The sunlight didn't reach us, and I suspected that the earth was encircled by a ring of clouds. That single ray of sunlight was insignificant. Liang Yu agreed and decided to proceed with the original plan to send a group of people to Wunyang Mountain that morning. However, many were reluctant to take the risk now that the sun was out. It can't rain with the sun, they reasoned. Why take a chance on that rickety boat when we can wait for the floodwaters to recede? Despite the sun's appearance, I knew we had to leave. I stood up and declared, I'm leaving for Wunyang Mountain. Who's with me? The crowd was torn, some hesitant, some fearful. But one by one, people stepped forward. Liang Yu supported me, and together with the twins, we gathered a group of 13 willing to make the journey. We left our food behind and embarked on the fishing boat, a vessel equipped with wooden planks for rowing, nylon ropes for stabilization, and tools for repairing the boat. The twins grabbed the planks and began to row, while Liang Yu secured the boat with ropes, instructing us all to hold on tight. As the boat moved away from the building, the speed picked up, and we all screamed as the boat surged forward. Thankfully, we had all held on, or some might have been thrown overboard. I nearly vomited from the motion and closed my eyes, taking deep breaths to calm my nerves. Ahead lay an endless expanse of floodwaters. The entire city was submerged, with only a few lonely high-rises standing amidst the deluge. People on the rooftops waved at us, pleading for help, but we were powerless to assist them. The twins, with their extensive experience, navigated the boat with great difficulty, but we managed to avoid capsizing. As we approached the southeastern outskirts of the city, we encountered a rapid current, but we made it into the river channel. The river, now unrecognizable, had become one with the yellow floodwaters. With the twins steering and the rest of us helping where we could, we made our way towards Wunyang Mountain. We had traveled for nearly 2 hours when a sudden clap of thunder shattered the quiet, and the sky, which had been illuminated by a sliver of sunlight, turned dark again. My heart raced, and a cold sweat broke out. The others also paled, and a sense of urgency filled the air. The rain, which had momentarily taken a break, was about to return with a vengeance. After a month of unrelenting rain, the downpour miraculously ceased, but I had a sinking feeling it would return. With Liang Yu and 11 others, we set off on a dilapidated boat towards Wunyang Mountain. The flood had already engulfed the 21st floor, and as we neared our destination, my worst fears materialized. Thunder rolled across the sky, heralding the inevitable deluge that would ravage the land. We still had half an hour to go. At that moment, the twins shouted, "The river is relatively calm, everyone row harder." They stood at the bow, using all their strength to propel the boat forward with the oars. Everyone sprang into action, clutching wooden planks and gliding through the water like dragon boats. I was grateful for the presence of 2 water sports athletes. Without them, we would have been powerless to move the boat. Suddenly, a deafening panic erupted. The rain, which had momentarily eased, now pounded down with renewed vigor, covering the entire city. It was impossible to see or move, but Liang Yu encouraged us not to fear, to keep going. The flood he spoke of was the second wave of mountain floods, far more terrifying than the water beneath us. As we neared Wunyang Mountain, the twins' faces turned grim. They knew we were in dire straits. The sound of the approaching flood grew louder, and our boat began to pitch and toss. The sight of the yellow dragon in the distance, a wall of water rushing towards us from the north, was terrifying. The first wave of the flood had been bad enough, but this one would surely engulf the 31st floor and leave no survivors in the city. Our boat slowed, hampered by the violent vibrations of the flood. Even if we had 10 minutes, escape seemed impossible. Some of us were paralyzed with fear, but Liang Yu roared, "Cheer up. We've come this far, don't give up now." He threw a wooden plank to me, and I gripped it tightly, biting my tongue until I tasted blood. I had to move, otherwise, it would be swallowed by the flood. I remembered escaping from a cold lake 3 years ago, when I also thought I would die. But I survived. I had to believe in the possibility of a miracle, not be trapped in a nightmare. As we continued to fight, a large fishing boat appeared in the distance, heading upstream against the current. It was a mirage, I thought, as no boat could possibly be navigating these waters. But as it drew closer, we realized it was real. An old man at the helm shouted at us, his figure blurry in the rain. I felt a surge of relief. It was my father. The large fishing boat, with its powerful engine, shattered the floodwaters as it approached. A huge net was cast over us, and we clung to it, being hauled onto the boat. The fishermen quickly turned the boat around and raced downstream. The wind and rain howled around us, and I heard my father's sobs as he embraced me. Now was not the time for tears, we had to focus on survival. As we neared Wunyang Mountain, the fishermen readied a pulley system to lift us to safety. The mountain, standing tall at over 2,000 meters, had a large part of its base submerged. The area around the mountain had been transformed into a makeshift refuge for the many people gathered there. A wooden platform descended from the pulley, capable of carrying more than 10 people at a time. As we were lifted to safety, I looked back and saw the flood rushing towards us like a beast. But we were safe, at least for now. As I conclude this part of the story, I want to leave you with a sense of reflection. Just like in a good movie or our own lives, it's the imperfections that make every story more perfect. If you're a fan who craves closure, I'll guide you to the ending in the comments. Thank you once again for your support, and I hope you'll look forward to my next story.